My name is Evelyn Hartley. I'm 38 years old. I direct legal equity programs at a nonprofit based in Providence. I write policy briefs by day fight to keep low-income families housed by night. And once 5 years ago, I nearly became the wife of a tech millionaire who now pretends I never existed. My sister made sure of that. I was engaged to Daniel Shaw, once the golden boy of Charlotte's startup world. And just 3 months before our wedding, my sister Vanessa took him. Without warning, without shame. She smiled at me at our engagement party, knowing full well she'd already slept with the man standing beside me. And today at our mother's funeral, she walked in beside him like nothing ever happened, draped in black silk diamond ring, catching light from the stained glass. And with that same cold smirk, she leaned in and whispered, "Poor you. Still alone at 38. I got the man, the money, and the mansion." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned to her and said, "Have you met my husband yet?" And when I called him over, her face went pale. Because actually, my husband was. That morning, the chapel was unusually warm for early spring. Morning light spilled across rows of pews as people shuffled in their footsteps, quiet against marble floors. I stood near the back, out of the way, hands folded, watching faces I hadn't seen in years slowly fill the room. I hadn't slept. Grief does that. Or maybe it wasn't grief alone. Maybe it was the anticipation, the knowing, the ache in your stomach before a fight you didn't ask for but refused to lose. I'd helped my father plan every detail of the service. The flowers, the music, the photo display at the altar, our mother's soft smile frozen in time above the casket. We chose hymns she loved. I helped him iron his suit that morning when his hands trembled too much to do it himself. We were a quiet team of two. But I knew we wouldn't be two for long. I knew they were coming, Vanessa and Daniel. I hadn't seen either of them since the week everything collapsed. No texts, no emails, no "I'm sorry" or "can we talk." They'd disappeared into the glossy world of investment brunches and curated couples photos. Their wedding had been in the Boston social pages, my name of course never mentioned. And yet, somehow I wasn't nervous, just ready. The chapel began to hush as the music softened. People settled into place, whispers fading. My father sat in the front row. My husband Adrian stood beside him, calm, grounded, unreadable. He gave me a quiet nod, and I nodded back. We were ready. Then right on cue, I heard the click of heels behind me. I didn't need to turn. I recognized the scent first. Vanessa had always worn the same perfume, sharp jasmine, with a base of something colder like steel. It filled the space around her, commanding attention before she even spoke. When she passed by, she stopped briefly, turned her head just enough to meet my eyes. "Poor Eve," she whispered. Her voice was sweet, almost sympathetic. Still alone at 38. I got the man, the money, and the mansion. I stared at her, quiet, steady. And then I smiled. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't for show. It was the kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't." I stepped slightly to the side, turned my head just enough, and said in the same low tone, "Have you met my husband yet?" She blinked. I raised a hand. Just one gesture. Adrian rose from his seat at the front of the chapel. Calm, tall, impeccably dressed in a navy suit. Every eye turned toward him as he walked down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. Vanessa froze, and Daniel, who had just finished adjusting his cufflinks, turned and saw him too. Color drained from his face, because Adrian wasn't just my husband, he was also the man who once tore Daniel's company apart. In court. The whispers started instantly. I stood still, heart steady, breath even. This wasn't revenge. This was truth, arriving exactly on time. She walked in like she owned the air we were breathing. Vanessa never did anything halfway. Even today, our mother's funeral, she had the nerve to arrive last, as if waiting for the room to hush just for her entrance. And it did. Every pair of eyes turned. She wore black satin. Fitted. Not mourning. Just expensive. Her hair was swept into a loose chignon, soft tendrils, framing her face in calculated elegance. Her heels struck the marble floor like punctuation marks. Daniel walked beside her, hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Somewhere behind me, I heard someone murmur, "Is that?" It was Vanessa and Daniel, side by side, husband and wife. She carried herself like a trophy, but I could see it, just beneath the flawless foundation and the high cheekbone smile tightness. A flicker in her eyes when she spotted Adrian sitting in the front row. And then she saw me. We locked eyes. For a second, something passed between us. Not sisterhood, not grief, something older, colder. Then her mouth curled into that familiar shape, a smirk masquerading as sympathy. "Poor Eve," she said softly, stopping beside me, just long enough for the words to land. Still alone at 38. She didn't wait for a response. I got the man, the money, and the mansion, she added, twisting her diamond ring ever so slightly, as if polishing it with the air. There it was. The line I knew she'd rehearsed. Probably said it to herself in the mirror this morning, choosing which earrings best framed her cruelty. I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned slightly, just enough for her to follow my gaze. "Have you met my husband yet?" I asked. There was a beat. Then, movement. Adrian stood. The entire chapel shifted. He didn't rush. Just stepped into the aisle with the kind of presence that fills a room without raising its voice. Navy suit, clean lines, a man utterly unbothered. When he reached us, he offered Vanessa a nod, then turned to Daniel. "Daniel," he said, calm and measured. "Been a long time." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed, his jaw tightened. "You're Burke. The guy who—" "Yes," Adrian replied before he could finish. "The guy whose legal team uncovered the compliance breaches in your financial architecture?" He smiled, not cruel, just precise. "That class action lawsuit you settled under NDA," he added. A silence fell. Vanessa blinked rapidly. "Wait. What is he talking about?" Daniel didn't answer. So I did. "He didn't tell you," I asked her, "about the fraud investigation or how that mansion you love so much is mortgaged to Adrian's firm?" I watched her flinch. Daniel took a half step back. His hand slipped from Vanessa's waist. His entire posture changed, like someone losing leverage mid-negotiation. Vanessa glanced around. The chapel didn't speak, but it listened. Every seat felt sharper, every breath louder. For the first time in 5 years, I felt taller. She stumbled, not literally, but emotionally. Her voice dropped. "You married Adrian Burke." "I did," I said quietly. "When? 2 years ago. And you didn't say anything." I looked at her for a moment. "You didn't either." She swallowed. The diamond ring on her finger seemed to weigh more now. She turned it once, twice, like it could spin the past into something prettier. Daniel turned away without a word, walking stiffly toward the front row. He didn't look back, didn't reach for her. Vanessa stood still. I could have walked away then. Could have left her standing in that moment, humiliated. But I didn't. Because the woman standing in front of me, flawless hair, $1,000 dress, perfect shoes, wasn't my enemy. She was just what was left of a girl who thought winning meant taking what someone else had. I watched her crumble for a split second before she caught herself, straightened, mask back on. Then she walked down the aisle alone. And I turned and returned to my seat beside Adrian. One chapter had closed, another had just begun. Back then, I still believed in boundaries, that the titles we give each other, sister, fiancé, family, meant something, that people once loved wouldn't cross certain lines. Vanessa started small. "Let me help you with vendors," she said after I told her Daniel and I had set a date. "You're so busy with work. I know your style. I'll only take on the boring stuff." I had just been promoted to program director at a nonprofit that specialized in legal aid for women and families. The job was demanding, and truthfully, I was grateful for the help. I told her she could assist with the florist. She smiled and said, "You'll thank me later." That was the beginning. Then came the dress fittings. She tagged along with Mom and me, though she wasn't invited to that first appointment. Then she started texting Daniel, asking about surprise preferences for the cake tasting, even though she wasn't supposed to be involved. She's just excited, Mom said once, noticing how my jaw clenched after Vanessa suggested we match our invitation fonts to one she'd found. Maybe this is her way of trying to be closer. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. But something felt off. She was everywhere, on calls with the caterer, meeting Daniel for coffee when I was stuck in meetings, showing up at the apartment with samples, sketches, questions, jokes, always smiling, always disarming. Daniel brushed it off. She's your sister, he said one night as we folded laundry together. Besides, she's funny. I get why you two are close. Close. That word felt foreign. Vanessa and I hadn't been close since college. Since she dropped out of NYU and moved back in with our parents, spending a year floating through temp jobs while I pushed through law school on scholarships and ramen. We were polite, civil, even, but never close. Still, she inserted herself gracefully, strategically into everything. She called me during work hours to update me on what she'd handled, then called Daniel afterward, just to double-check his tastes. She once said, I know his schedule better than I know my own at this point, and laughed. I laughed too. But something in me twisted. It wasn't the kind of twist you talk about. It was the slow, silent kind, the one that sets in like a hairline fracture and grows with pressure. One night, I came home early from a late planning meeting that had been canceled last minute. I found Vanessa sitting on our couch with Daniel. They weren't touching, nothing inappropriate, but there was a glass of wine in her hand, a half-empty bottle on the table, and a joke mid-laughter that died the moment I walked in. Vanessa recovered first. Hey, she chirped. We were just going over cake flavors. You like chocolate almond, right? I nodded. She raised her glass and said, To your wedding, big sis. Daniel looked at me. His eyes didn't say caught. They said nothing to see here, and I let it go. Because I didn't want to be the insecure bride. I didn't want to ruin what looked perfect on paper. We had the venue, the ring, the man who kissed my forehead every morning and said, We're a team. I kept telling myself she's your sister. She would never. But in the quiet hours when I brushed my teeth beside a man who suddenly seemed further away, when I reread text threads that felt overly familiar, when I caught Vanessa humming the same playlist Daniel made for me, I started to wonder. Not just about her, but about me. How many things had I ignored in the name of peace? How many glances, silences, and half-truths had I accepted with a nod and a forced smile? Sometimes betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers. And sometimes it wears your sister's face. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished a 3-hour grant review session and stopped by Daniel's condo to drop off a contract draft he'd forgotten that morning. He'd texted me, leave it on the kitchen counter, but I figured I'd surprise him with his favorite sushi and a bottle of that sake he pretended not to like, but always finished. The front door was unlocked. Odd, but not alarming. Daniel often forgot to double-check the deadbolt if he was in a rush. I let myself in, calling out softly, Hey, I brought food. No answer. I walked into the kitchen, set the bag down, then wandered toward his office. Maybe he was on a call. I'd leave the papers on his desk. That's when I saw it. A single silver earring on the armrest of the reading chair in the corner of his study. Not just any earring. I knew that piece. Dangling silver with a tiny sapphire at the base, a gift from our grandmother. Vanessa had worn them at our engagement party. She called them her lucky pair. I picked it up slowly. Cold metal, familiar shape. A laugh echoed from the hallway, female too familiar. I froze. The study door was slightly ajar. I stepped back quietly and turned toward the sound. And there they were. Daniel and Vanessa, in the living room, not kissing, not touching, but sitting so close on the couch their knees touched, her legs curled beneath her, his hand resting along the back cushion behind her shoulders, and the look she gave him, playful, intimate, entitled. She tilted her head and said something I couldn't hear. He laughed softly, leaned in. I didn't wait to see more. I backed away, walked down the hall, picked up the bag of food and the contract folder. I left the earring exactly where I found it. By the time I got outside, I couldn't breathe. The spring air felt thick. I climbed into my car and sat still, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I drove to the waterfront, parked by the lake where Daniel first told me he loved me, where Vanessa had taken pictures of us laughing on a picnic blanket. I stared at the water. I wanted to scream, to storm back in and throw the earring in their faces, to demand an explanation. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I wouldn't get one. They'd smile, lie, say I was imagining things, twist it into a misunderstanding. They were good at that, Daniel with his charm, Vanessa with her disarming sweetness. They'd make me feel like the problem. So I sat, and I breathed, and I thought, and when the sun dipped low, I went home to my apartment, the one I hadn't yet moved out of because Daniel and I hadn't finished consolidating space. I took a long shower. Then I called my best friend Alicia and said I needed to talk. That night over tea in her kitchen, I told her everything. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" She didn't say, but they'd never. She just reached across the table and held my hand. "You don't have to prove it," she said. "If your gut knows, that's enough." She was right. The next day I showed up at Daniel's office with no warning. I walked in during his lunch hour holding the earring in my palm. "I think this belongs to your +1, I said. He blinked. "Vanessa?" I didn't answer, just held it higher. "Oh," he said smoothly. "Yeah, she probably dropped it last week. I gave her a ride to the florist. Her car was in the shop. That was it. No guilt, no flicker, just effortless fiction." I didn't argue. I placed the earring on his desk. Then I walked away. I left Charlotte 2 weeks later. No public announcement, no tearful goodbye. Just a quiet exit and a forwarding address only my parents knew. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Providence, the kind with outdated tile in the kitchen and a faucet that never quite stopped dripping. But it was mine. And more importantly, it wasn't his. I took a new job, program director at a nonprofit legal clinic, the kind of place where cases stacked high and the work never really ended. I threw myself into it like a lifeline, helping women fight evictions, filing restraining orders, rewriting policy briefs at midnight, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to him or her. I changed my phone number, deleted social media, blocked them both. I didn't tell people the truth, not even close friends. When someone asked what happened with Daniel, I said we wanted different things, that life pulled us apart, that it was mutual. And they'd nod politely, not realizing I'd rehearsed those lies until they sounded like gospel. Because saying it out loud, my sister slept with my fiancé, felt obscene. Like I'd be the one shamed for it. Like I'd be pitied. And I didn't want pity. I wanted distance, silence. A new name if I could have managed it. Nights were the worst. During the day I could keep busy. I could smile at the courthouse receptionist, take notes during hearings, fill out forms with a mechanical rhythm. But at night, it all unraveled. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The proposal, the earring, the moment I walked in and saw them on the couch, the way Vanessa laughed too loudly at his jokes, the look he gave her that he used to give me. I questioned everything. Was I blind, weak? Did I ignore the signs? Was I just not enough? Some nights I'd sit in the shower until the hot water ran cold, let it scald the doubt from my skin, scrub at my body like betrayal might be a film I could wash away. Other nights I'd open my laptop and stare at photos I hadn't deleted yet. Engagement pictures on the beach. Vanessa in the background of so many shots, always just out of focus, always just close enough. I started therapy. Quietly. A few sessions at first, then more regularly. My therapist, Julia, didn't ask much in the beginning. She let me sit in silence until I could form full sentences without choking on them. She once asked, "When did you stop trusting yourself?" And I had no answer. Because I hadn't noticed it slipping. It was like a slow leak in the foundation. One day you're standing, the next, you're drowning. I began journaling, writing things I couldn't say out loud, letters I never sent, questions I didn't want answers to. I wrote one to Vanessa. It started, I don't hate you, but I scratched it out. Then tried, you broke something I didn't know could break. Eventually, I stopped trying to find the right words. I let the paper stay blank. Sometimes that was the truest thing I could offer. I wasn't healing yet, not really. But I was breathing again, and for now, that had to be enough. Therapy wasn't something I planned. It started as a suggestion from Alicia after I confessed in a moment of vulnerability that I couldn't sleep more than 3 hours without waking in a sweat. She gave me a card slitted across the table like a quiet offering. I kept it in my wallet for 2 weeks before I called. The first session, I said barely anything. I sat on the edge of a beige couch, clutching a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea I didn't ask for, and stared at the small crack in the corner of the ceiling. Julia, the therapist, didn't push. She just waited. By the third session, the dam cracked. I told her about Vanessa, about Daniel, about how betrayal doesn't come in a scream, it comes in a whisper, in an extra laugh, in a forgotten glance. I told her how I'd spent years teaching women how to protect themselves from people who didn't respect their worth and still somehow let it happen to me. Julia never judged. She just listened. And slowly I started to listen to my own voice, the one I'd muted for so long. At work, I found clarity in cases I'd once avoided. I started taking on women fleeing controlling relationships, financial coercion, emotional manipulation, the kind that never leaves bruises but crushes you all the same. There was one client, Jasmine, who looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "He never hit me." But I forgot how to make a single decision without asking him first. I almost replied, "Same." But I didn't. Instead, I helped her rewrite her rental contract, guided her through restraining order paperwork, and stood next to her in court the day she testified. She won. And afterward, she hugged me. Tight. She whispered, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible." That night, I cried in my car. Not because of sadness, but because I realized I was no longer fighting just to survive. I was fighting to rebuild. And rebuilding is a messy, beautiful thing. I started saying no. To the colleagues who asked for more than they gave. To the men who texted at midnight like I was an afterthought. To the inner voice that whispered, "Be quiet. Don't upset anyone." I replaced it with a new voice. One that said, "You're not here to be easy. You're here to be whole." I learned to cook for one. I bought fresh flowers every Sunday. I went to bookstores and didn't feel lonely when I left alone. I filled my apartment with the scent of lavender and fresh basil, and silence, precious chosen silence. But my heart, it stayed frozen. I could smile, I could function, I could even laugh on occasion. But love, that door remained locked. Men flirted, friends hinted, even Alicia said, "You know, not all of them are like him." I nodded. But I couldn't picture it, someone knowing me fully and not one day choosing someone shinier, younger, easier. I'd go on long walks past families on porches and couples holding hands and think, I want that. But I don't trust it. That was the wound I hadn't touched yet. Because forgiving myself for not seeing the betrayal, that was one thing. But believing I could ever be loved again without suspicion, without fear, that was something else entirely. Still, I kept going, one session, one case, one morning at a time. And on most days, that was enough. Until one day it wasn't, and that's when he walked in. But I'll tell you about Adrian later, because before love found me again, I had to find myself first. And in that season of stillness between heartbreak and hope, I was becoming the kind of woman I'd always defended but never truly believed I was allowed to be. 3 years later, I met Adrian Burke. I wasn't looking for anyone. After years of rebuilding my life, love seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford or didn't trust. But Adrian didn't walk into my life with fanfare. He didn't try to dazzle me or prove anything. He simply showed up and stayed. We met at a nonprofit legal conference in Providence. He was one of the guest panelists discussing the legal ethics of emerging tech startups. While the room buzzed with technical jargon, Adrian spoke in a calm, clear voice. His words weren't embellished, but his insights were sharp. He had a quiet kind of authority, the kind that didn't need volume to be heard. Later, we found ourselves at the same table during lunch. He asked questions, but never intruded. He listened, really listened. And when he spoke about his work, it wasn't to impress. He genuinely believed in what he did, advocating for transparency, protecting whistleblowers, standing up to corporate malpractice. Something about his presence settled the air around him, like still water over chaos. We started with coffee meetings, then occasional dinners. There was no pressure, no expectation, just a growing rhythm between us. Adrian never filled the silence with empty talk. He let it stretch, giving me space to be exactly where I was. I remember one evening after dinner, we sat in his living room surrounded by bookshelves lined with legal volumes and old jazz records. He handed me a mug of chamomile tea, then sat across from me, not too close, not too far. I asked why he never pushed for more. He looked at me thoughtful. Because healing doesn't happen on demand, he said. And love, real love, doesn't rush in and take over. It walks beside you until you're ready to let it in. That night, I didn't say anything. I just nodded. And somehow, that was enough. Adrian didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer grand declarations. He didn't need to. What he gave me was steadiness. A presence that didn't compete with my past or fear my silence. He was the first man who didn't make me feel like I had to shrink myself to fit into his world. With him, I could take up space, breathe, trust the quiet. And so slowly we built something. Not a castle, not a dream. Just a foundation, real, steady, imperfect, but ours. Adrian became my anchor. And in many ways, the calm after a storm I never thought would end. 4.21 My mother's illness. It started with a voicemail from my father, short, vague, but enough to make my chest tighten. Your mother's been feeling unwell. Might be nothing, but maybe come visit. So I did. Then again, and again. Soon trips to Boston became routine. I didn't move back, but my weekends, my holidays, my moments in between court cases and pro bono work all belonged to home again. The house I'd left 5 years earlier hadn't changed much, but I had. My mother's illness was slow and cruel. Not the kind that announces itself loudly, but the kind that lingers like fog. Some days she was lucid bright even, bright. Other days she forgot what year it was or called me by the wrong name. Vanessa was there too, of course, always polished, always composed. She made herself useful arranging doctor's visits, organizing prescriptions, updating extended family. And yet every time I saw her, I felt that quiet recoil in my chest. A reminder of wounds not yet scarred. We didn't fight, but we didn't speak either. Not about anything real. Every exchange was dipped in politeness, careful as glass. My mother, perhaps sensing the rift, tried harder than ever to pull us close. Life's too short, Evelyn, she said one afternoon, her fingers wrapped around mine, thinner than I remembered. I want you two to find your way back to each other. I didn't answer. How could I explain that forgiveness isn't a decision, it's a process? That the silence between Vanessa and me wasn't just distance, it was grief, betrayal. And 5 years of building a life without her in it. Adrian came with me often. He never asked questions, just offered quiet company. My father welcomed him, warmly grateful, perhaps, that I had someone steady by my side. He helped fix things around the house, tightened hinges, replaced old bulbs, carried groceries. In the stillness of those moments, I sometimes caught my mother watching us from her armchair, a small, contented smile on her face. She never asked about Daniel. Never mentioned the engagement that never became a wedding. Maybe she knew better. Maybe she understood that there were things a mother couldn't mend. Still, she tried. She cooked when she could, left little notes in the kitchen. There's soup in the fridge. Don't forget your scarf, it's cold out. They felt like breadcrumbs through a forest we'd all gotten lost in. One evening, as she rested on the living room couch, she looked at me and said, "Promise me you'll at least try, Evelyn." Again, I didn't respond. I kissed her forehead and tucked the blanket around her. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. But something was shifting. Grief has a way of softening the edges of even the hardest stories. And in those quiet days filled with ginger tea, muted television, and the slow passing of time, I began to see my mother not as the woman who once welcomed Daniel, but as a mother who had loved both her daughters deeply, desperately, and imperfectly. She was trying to gather what time she had left and press it into our hands like a fragile offering. Not to force us, but to remind us life is short, and sometimes the door to healing is smaller than pride. I wasn't ready to walk through it, but I was for the first time standing at its threshold. My mother passed away on a rainy Thursday morning. I was in court when my father called. I didn't answer the first time, then the second came, and I knew. The funeral was held 3 days later at a small chapel on the edge of town. It was the one she liked, the one with the sloped roof and ivy crawling up the brick. My father and I arranged everything together. Flowers, music, the readings. I didn't cry. Not yet. There were too many things to do. Adrian stayed close, not hovering, just steady. He handled things I couldn't bring myself to, calls to distant cousins, speaking gently to neighbors who dropped off casseroles and condolences. Every time I felt the weight tipping, he'd offer me a glance, a touch to the elbow, grounding me. The chapel was half full when I arrived early that morning. I took my seat at the front beside my father, who looked 10 years older than just a week ago. The minister approached us quietly, nodding. We discussed the service in hushed tones. Then I heard heels. 2 pairs. Precise, deliberate. I turned. Vanessa walked in a vision in structured black, her face a porcelain mask of grief. Her hand was looped around Daniel's arm. For a second, just one breath, my heart clenched. Not from pain, from memory. A memory that once would have made me unravel. But I didn't look away. Daniel didn't meet my eyes. He looked smaller somehow. Or maybe I had just grown. Adrian appeared beside me. Without asking, he sat down, placing his hand over mine. Just enough. Just right. Vanessa spotted him then. And for the first time in the 5 years since the fracture, I saw something unexpected flicker across her face: confusion. The service began. Hymns were sung, verses were read. I stood at the lectern to give the eulogy. My voice only trembled once, when I spoke about how my mother used to hum while folding laundry, how she believed that nothing was truly lost if it was loved well enough. As I returned to my seat, I caught Vanessa watching me. Not with malice, not even regret. Just watching. Outside, the rain had stopped. People filed out quietly, sharing umbrellas, whispering memories. I stood by the old oak tree, thanking each guest as they passed. Daniel walked by first. He nodded stiffly. No words. Then, Vanessa. She hesitated. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but nothing came. I didn't fill the silence for her. Adrian and I left not long after. As we drove away, I glanced back once at the chapel, now nearly empty. The storm had passed. And for the first time in a long while, I realized it hadn't taken me with it. Later that evening, we attended the small reception held in the community hall beside the chapel. Light refreshments, soft music, and somber voices. I stood by the window, watching rain collect on the ledge when I felt her approach. Vanessa. Her heels clicked confidently across the tile. Her tone was syrupy and sharp all at once. Chi van mot min a. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Instead, I turned with the calm that only years of healing could bring. No, I said softly. Have you met my husband? Right on cue. Adrian stepped into view. Tall, composed, his hand gently reaching for mine. Vanessa's smirk froze, and behind her, Daniel stiffened. His eyes locked onto Adrian's face, and I watched color drain from his own. Adrian, ever the gentleman, extended a hand. Daniel Shaw wasn't it. Daniel didn't respond. Couldn't. Vanessa glanced between them, confusion flickering. I didn't think we'd meet again, Adrian said casually. Not since the investigation. There it was. The silence snapped like a twig underfoot. Daniel opened his mouth. Shut it. The twitch in his jaw was all I needed to see. Adrian turned to me, his voice light but meaningful. Remember that tech case I told you about? The one with the phantom investments and fabricated metrics? I nodded slowly. I remembered, vividly. It was a major case 3 years ago, one that nearly ended in federal charges if not for a quiet settlement. Daniel's startup had been at the center of it, I helped the whistleblower draft the evidence packet, Adrian added, still facing me. Didn't realize then that the CEO was someone from your past. Vanessa's hand slipped from Daniel's arm. She whispered, "You knew Adrian," simply nodded. Not at first. But I knew what mattered. He wasn't worth your sorrow. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The room had quieted around us, eyes averted, conversations paused. Vanessa stepped back as if needing space from the truth that had just landed at her feet. Daniel muttered something about getting fresh air and exited. Adrian and I stood there for a moment longer, then I turned to Vanessa. "I'm not here to gloat," I said, voice steady. "But if you're wondering whether karma works, maybe today's your answer." She didn't reply, just watched me with something that resembled respect or maybe recognition. As Adrian and I walked away hand in hand, I felt the weight of 5 years lift off my shoulders. Not because I'd won, but because I didn't need to anymore. Later that night, as we walked back to my father's house, the rain had softened to a mist, and the street lamps cast golden halos across the slick pavement. Adrian's hand was warm and mine grounding. We paused near the old maple tree by the gate one I'd climbed as a child, scraped knees and all. Adrian turned to me. "There's something I've wanted to tell you," he said gently. I tilted my head. "What is it?" He hesitated, not out of fear but care. Then I knew who Daniel was. From the beginning. The breath caught in my throat. "You knew I did," he admitted. "Not immediately. But early enough. I recognized him from the investigation notes back when his company came under scrutiny." I searched his face, trying to decipher what else lay beneath that admission. "I didn't say anything," Adrian continued, "because I didn't want our relationship to become about him. Or about revenge." I swallowed hard. "I needed you to choose healing, Evelyn. Not retaliation. I needed you to see what love could be without comparison." His voice held no judgment, no superiority, only tenderness. For 3 years, he added, I've kept that part to myself. Not because I was hiding it, but because I was protecting something more important, your chance to rebuild, without shadows. I blinked, overcome. All this time, while I stumbled through the fog of my past, Adrian had been quietly shielding me from it, never pushing, never demanding. Just present, steady. "I watched you grow stronger," he said, "and I wanted you to have your victories without him tainting them." It struck me then how rare that kind of love was, the kind that didn't need to be seen or credited, that didn't posture or boast, that simply stood. I reached for his hand tighter this time. "You never told me," I whispered. "I didn't need to," he replied. "You've already done the hard part. You healed. That was always yours." The wind rustled the leaves above us. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes rang. In that moment, I realized Adrian hadn't just stepped into my life. He'd waited patiently for me to reclaim it, and in doing so, he'd become part of the foundation I never thought I'd trust again. Not because he saved me, but because he never tried to. He just believed I could save myself, and stood by until I did. The next morning, I found Vanessa on the back porch, curled up on the swing my mother once loved. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup smudged, hair unbrushed. She looked nothing like the woman who had strutted into the funeral parlor beside Daniel. She looked like a sister. Lost. I didn't say anything at first, just poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. She took it without a word. "I didn't know," she whispered after a long silence. "About what Daniel did. He told me. He said you left because you couldn't stand his success, that you were jealous, that you didn't love him." Her voice cracked. I believed him. I wanted to. I sat beside her, keeping my gaze on the garden. The hydrangeas were starting to bloom blue like Mom always liked them. "I left," I said evenly, "because I didn't pity him. And he couldn't handle not being the victim." Vanessa turned to look at me, her lips trembling. "He said you hated me, that you always thought I was the broken one." I let out a breath, slow and tired. "I didn't hate you, Vanessa. I hated what we let happen." Her shoulders shook. She covered her face, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn." I didn't answer. Not immediately, not with words. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small notebook I'd found among Mom's things, the one where she'd jotted down thoughts, quotes, prayers. I flipped it open to the last page. She wrote this, I said, placing it in Vanessa's lap. The night before she went into the hospital, Vanessa wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater and read aloud, her voice shaking, I hope one day my daughters will sit at the same table again, not to blame, not to forget, but to begin anew. Silence hung between us like the morning mist. I don't expect you to forgive me, Vanessa whispered. I wanted you to know the truth, and to say it out loud. I looked at her then, really looked. There was remorse in her eyes, but also something else, something that hadn't been there before. Courage? I'm tired, I said softly. Tired of carrying all this, of pretending I don't miss having a sister. She nodded, tearful. I miss you too. For a long while we just sat there, the porch swaying gently beneath us. Two women with too much history. And maybe enough left to write a different ending. When I stood, I didn't walk away. Instead, I reached for the coffee pot. Another cup. Vanessa blinked, then smiled. And for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. Later that evening, Vanessa found me in the kitchen sitting at the table with Mom's old journal. She looked hesitant, as if debating whether to speak or walk away. Her usual poise was replaced by a tremble in her fingers and a sheen of vulnerability. I need to tell you something, she said finally. I closed the journal and gave her a nod. She sat down across from me, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel controls everything. I didn't interrupt. My bank account, my passwords, even who I can talk to. At first, it felt like protection. But now, her breath hitched. Now, it's a cage. I kept my face neutral, listening. He tells me what to wear, tracks my location. He said if I ever left, I'd have nothing. He made me believe I was lucky he chose me at all. Her voice cracked. The house, it's mortgaged to the hilt. He told me not to worry about the money, but he never let me see the numbers. I found out last week we're months behind on payments. He blames me. Says I spend too much on image. I could feel a quiet rage building in my chest. Not for revenge, but for the years we'd both lost to the same man's manipulations. I wanted to leave, Vanessa whispered. I've packed my bags twice, but then I think, what if he's right? What if I can't survive without him? I stood and walked over to the cupboard, retrieving a familiar leather-bound notebook. It was Mom's, the same one I'd read from earlier. I placed it on the table, sliding it gently toward her. She wrote in here every day, I said, even when she was too tired to talk. Vanessa looked down at it, her fingers brushing the worn cover. I opened to a dog-eared page, one I hadn't shown her before. Mom's handwriting was shakier there, but still clear. To forgive is not to forget. It's to allow space for healing to begin. I hope my girls give themselves and each other that space. She believed in us, I said, even when we didn't. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears again. You still believe? I met her gaze steadily. I believe you still have a choice, and I believe that healing doesn't begin with him. It begins with you. She nodded slowly, clutching the journal like a lifeline. I don't know how to start, she said. Maybe with coffee, I replied. And a plan. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. Outside, the wind rustled the hydrangeas. Vanessa traced the spine of the journal and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't say anything. Some moments don't need words, just an open seat and the willingness to offer it. I stayed in Mom's house for a few days after the funeral. The quiet was unbearable at first, each creak in the floorboards a reminder of a voice now silenced. Dad kept himself busy in the garage, sorting through old tools and loose screws like they held answers. I chose the attic, dusty, sun-dappled, and filled with boxes marked in her handwriting. One afternoon, while going through a crate labeled Winters, I found it a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a journal, Mom's, leather-bound and familiar. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, holding it like something sacred. The first page was dated 10 years ago. Her handwriting, neat, a little slanted, pulled me in immediately. She'd written about us, me, Vanessa, Dad, bits of the past preserved in ink. I read until my eyes blurred. That night I showed it to Dad. We sat at the dining table, the same spot we used to gather for Sunday dinners. He put on his reading glasses, skimmed a few pages, then quietly said, "She never stopped trying." I nodded. She wrote down everything, fears, hopes, even regrets. He touched the page with her handwriting, then closed the book. She wanted peace, for all of us. The next morning, while folding linens, I found a loose sheet tucked between the towels in the linen closet. It was from her journal, ripped, possibly meant to be found separately. "I hope my daughters find the way back to each other. I couldn't fix it while I was alive. Maybe my death can be the beginning of something they write together." I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't guilt I felt, it was clarity, the kind that cuts clean and deep. I spent that evening walking around the neighborhood, our old block, hydrangeas blooming in every yard, dusk painting gold across the rooftops. I could almost hear her voice, not scolding, just reminding. When I returned, Dad had made tea. We didn't say much, just sat on the porch, steam rising from our mugs, grief between us like a third person we both accepted but didn't invite. In the quiet, I felt her more than I ever had in the years leading up to her death. Not as someone perfect, but someone who still believed we could be more than what we became. Someone who hoped. And that night, for the first time in 5 years, I let myself hope too. The next afternoon, I heard a knock on the back door, 3 soft taps like someone wasn't sure they were welcome. I opened it, and there she was. Vanessa, alone. No Daniel. No sleek car humming in the driveway. Just her in a windbreaker too thin for the breeze, hair pulled back like she hadn't planned to come but did anyway. "Do you have coffee?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside and nodded toward the kitchen. Always. We didn't talk while I brewed it. The kitchen was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe we'd just grown into women who carried silence like armor. I placed the mug in front of her, the blue one with a chip on the rim. Her favorite once. She wrapped both hands around it. No sugar, no milk. Just how she used to drink it before she learned to keep up appearances. We sat at the old kitchen table, oak legs, scratched surface, a map of childhood arguments and holiday meals etched into the wood. She glanced at the chair across from hers. Dad used to sit there. Elbows always on the table. I smiled faintly, and Mom would swat him with a napkin. Vanessa exhaled a half laugh, half sigh. "I don't know why I came. You don't have to." But I needed to. Silence again. But it didn't choke. It settled. She stared into her cup like it might show her the right words. "It's not okay." What I did. I thought I had everything. And then I woke up and realized I had nothing that mattered. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. I just didn't know how to undo 5 years of pain in a sentence. "I used to think you were so strong it made you cold," she continued. "But maybe you were just protecting yourself." "I was," I said softly. We both sipped. No tears. No raised voices. Just 2 women in the ruins of something they didn't know how to rebuild. "I read Mom's journal," I said after a long pause. "She wanted us to find a way back." Vanessa looked up, eyes glassy. "Do you think that's possible?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But maybe it starts with coffee." We sat there until the sun began to set, painting warm light across the countertops. It felt unfinished. But maybe all beginnings do. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She just said, "Thank you." And for the first time, I said it back. Vanessa cradled the mug in both hands, her fingers tracing the rim like she was measuring the weight of her next words. We'd been sitting in silence for almost 10 minutes. The kitchen felt suspended in time, the same pale yellow walls, the same humming fridge, the same chipped counter by the sink. But everything was different. I looked at her, really looked. There were new lines around her eyes, a weariness she no longer tried to conceal. She caught me staring and offered a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I wasn't sure if you'd let me in," she said quietly. I nodded. I wasn't sure either. She looked down. I've made such a mess, Evelyn. I didn't disagree, but I also didn't add to her burden. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore, just raw. I took a deep breath. I don't know if I've forgiven you. I said each word deliberate. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I never will completely. She didn't flinch, just nodded slowly like she expected it, like she deserved worse. But I continued, I think. I'm ready to begin again. If you are. She looked up then. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. I am. I will be. We sat with that for a moment, the weight and relief of possibility. Then she whispered, I'm leaving him. I blinked. Daniel. She nodded. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I haven't told him yet, but I will. Soon. There was no dramatic flourish, no tears, just resolve. It was the most real I'd seen her in years. I choose myself this time, she said almost like a vow. And something inside me shifted, not an undoing of pain, but an acknowledgement of growth. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there, two women who'd been torn apart by love and ego and silence, now cautiously trying to stitch together a thread of truth. Later, she helped me bring down some linens from the closet. She folded the sheets like she used to when we were little corners, aligned sleeves tucked. Before she left, she turned back in the doorway. Thank you for the coffee, I nodded. Come back tomorrow. I'll make us breakfast. She smiled. With toast that's not burned this time, I laughed. No promises. When the door clicked shut behind her, I exhaled. Not everything was healed, not everything was forgiven. But something had begun. And that was enough for now. When my flight landed in Providence, the air felt gentler, or maybe it was me lighter somehow. Adrian was waiting at arrivals, holding a coffee in one hand and my favorite book in the other, as if he knew I'd need both. He smiled when he saw me, and in that quiet smile, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. We didn't say much at first, just the usual, how was the flight? Did you get any sleep? Want Thai or pizza for dinner? The kind of mundane questions that gently guide you back to real life. But in the car, I turned to him. I don't hate Vanessa anymore. He glanced at me, surprised not because he doubted my capacity to let go, but because he understood how long I had carried that weight. I'm still hurt, I said, staring out the window at the blur of storefronts and streetlights. But it doesn't burn like it used to. It doesn't own me. He didn't try to respond right away. He just reached over his fingers, brushing mine, not gripping, not insisting, just presence. I told her, I added, that I haven't fully forgiven her. But I said I might be ready to start again. And she said she is too. Adrian pulled into our driveway, turned off the engine, and let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he looked at me, really looked like someone taking inventory of a soul that had walked through fire. And how do you feel? He asked gently. I smiled. Lighter. Like I finally set down a box I didn't realize I'd been dragging through every room of my life. He got out and opened my door, not out of chivalry, but care. I stepped out, and he pulled me into a hug. Not tight, just enough. It was the kind of hug that said, I'm here. Not, I'll fix it, not, I told you so. Just here. Inside the house smelled like fresh laundry and the faint scent of jasmine tea. Adrian had remembered to water my plants. The small things that mean something. I dropped my bag in the hallway and kicked off my shoes. The familiar creak of floorboards underfoot made something inside me unclench. That night we sat on the couch, legs tangled, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching a documentary neither of us really followed. My head rested on his shoulder, and for the first time in years, my mind wasn't racing. I didn't feel like a woman bracing for impact. I felt like a woman beginning again. And that, too, was enough. 3 months later, I stood in our bathroom barefoot on the cold tile, staring at 2 pink lines. Positive. My hands trembled slightly as I sat down on the closed toilet lid, clutching the test. The steam from the shower still clung to the mirror, blurring the reflection of a woman I barely recognized, not because she was a stranger, but because she was becoming. And then I cried. Not from fear, not even from surprise, but from something deeper, a release of a belief I'd quietly carried for years, that motherhood was a door that had closed on me long ago, and I had learned to stop pressing my ear to it. But here it was, open. I wrapped myself in Adrian's robe and padded back to the bedroom. He was still asleep, one arm draped across my pillow, his hair a mess of honesty. I didn't wake him. Not yet. This moment, this exact sliver of time belonged only to me. Later that morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't touch and an envelope I couldn't seal. I was writing to my mother. Not to tell her I was pregnant, she wouldn't read these words, but because my heart needed to speak to hers wherever it had gone. Dear Mom, you once said, we get to choose what we carry. I never understood that until now. I carried anger, I carried grief, I carried the weight of being the daughter left behind. But I've also learned to carry something else, Grace. Vanessa came back, and I let her in, not completely, but enough to remember we're sisters before anything else. She's choosing herself. And I think in some way I'm choosing both of us too. And now there's this tiny heartbeat inside me, something new, something I thought I'd lost the right to hope for. I used to think that being a mother meant having all the answers, but maybe it just means learning to forgive at the right time. You did that, didn't you? In your own quiet way. I get it now, Mom. And thank you. I signed my name, folded the letter, and tucked it between the pages of her favorite gardening book on the shelf. She'd once said the smell of soil made her feel closer to life. I hoped somehow she'd feel close to me now. That evening, I told Adrian. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he knelt in front of me, pressed his forehead to my belly, and whispered, "You are already so loved." We held each other in the soft, golden silence of our kitchen. I had never felt more afraid. Or more ready. The past hadn't vanished. But something new was growing, rooted not in revenge, but in redemption. And for the first time in years, I wasn't holding onto pain. I was holding possibility. I didn't tell this story to expose anyone, not to stir old wounds or gather sympathy. I'm telling it for anyone who's ever been broken by betrayal and thought their only way out was through vengeance. It's not. I know what it feels like to be humiliated so thoroughly that silence becomes your only companion. To walk into a room and feel like your existence is an inconvenience. To be erased by those you trusted the most. But I also know this: you don't have to win loudly. Healing doesn't need an audience. Recovery isn't a performance. You don't have to shout your pain into the world to prove that you've survived it. Sometimes the quietest revenge is choosing peace. Choosing yourself. It took me years of unpacking what happened. Years of fighting the urge to retaliate. Years of rebuilding my identity from the ashes of someone else's choices. And now, standing on the other side, I can say it without bitterness: I won. Not because Vanessa apologized. Not because Daniel lost anything, but because I stopped losing myself. I have a partner who loves without conditions. A home built on honesty. A child on the way born not out of desperation or repair, but out of hope. And I have a sister fragile and uncertain, trying to learn how to live honestly. We're not whole, but we're trying. That matters. You don't need to orchestrate someone's downfall to rise. Let them watch you rise without them. Because one day, they will. One day when you walk into a room, calm, grounded, content, they'll look at you and feel the weight of everything they gave up when they chose pride over love, deception over truth. And you'll smile. Not because they're hurting, but because you're not. So if you've ever been betrayed, breathe. Drink water. Light a candle. Write the letter you won't send. Take the long walk. Learn something new. Cry. Sleep. Stretch. Say no. Reclaim your time. Reclaim your name. And when you're ready, you'll whisper it to yourself first: I made it. I didn't need to destroy anyone to feel whole. Then maybe one day, you'll say it out loud. I won. To the one still nursing the wound of betrayal, I see you. I know what it's like to sit with silence in your chest, wondering if your quiet makes you weak. To replay scenes that weren't fair, to imagine what you should have said, what you could have done to even the scale. I know the sharp burn of injustice, the ache of being misunderstood, the torment of watching someone walk away with what once felt like your future. But I also know this silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room. I didn't throw plates. I didn't write public letters or make scenes. I didn't storm into their lives demanding apologies. That's not because I didn't have rage. Oh, I did. But I learned something in the years that followed. Not all justice is noisy. Not all victories are loud. Some are as simple as peace. I'm not saying healing is easy, or quick, or even guaranteed. I'm saying it's possible. When I stopped trying to be understood by the people who hurt me, I started hearing myself more clearly. When I stopped needing them to name their wrongs, I was free to name my worth. That shift, it changed everything. Justice didn't come wrapped in a dramatic confrontation. It came slowly, quietly. In the form of mornings that didn't sting. In friendships that felt real. In the man who saw me fully and stayed anyway. In the sister who returned not perfect, not healed, but honest. And in myself. For surviving. For growing. For choosing love when bitterness would have been easier. So if you're still aching, still raw, still wondering how to hold your head high after they tried to lower your worth, just live. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that they never defined you. Let your life be your answer. Your laughter, your calm, your joy, your softness that remained despite what hardened you. That's the quietest kind of justice, and sometimes the most powerful. Evelyn Hartley. If this story found you at a low point, I hope it helped you look up. Not every wound needs an audience, not every victory needs applause, but your healing. It deserves a life that feels like peace. If you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or underestimated, let today be the day you choose you. Not to fight back, but to rise, quietly, powerfully, and wholly yours. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning, your hands wrapped around a cup of coffee? Or a sleepless night where stories like this help you breathe just a little easier? Tell us in the comments, we read them all. With care, with respect. And if this story touched something in you, I hope you'll stay with us. Not just to hear more stories, but to be part of something rare. A space where kindness still matters, where healing is possible, where second chances aren't fairy tales, they're earned every single day. Thank you for spending this time with me, and wherever you are, whatever weight you're carrying, may you leave this story a little lighter. Remember, sometimes justice doesn't shout. It sits in silence and waits for you to choose peace. Take care, and I'll meet you in the next story.